Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a genuinely fascinating architectural breakdown of 7th century governance. We usually look at early Islamic history strictly through a theological lens, right? But today, we are flipping the script. We're looking at the blueprints of a state. We're going to explore this concept of siyasa shartiya, or Islamic politics, and see exactly how the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, organized a highly complex, fully functioning government from the ground up. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for unpacking how our fractured tribal system was completely transformed into a functional, devolved government. We'll start with the foundation of Medina, look at its constitution, the 12 elected naqibs, the autonomy of Jewish tribes, and finally wrap up with the expansion to Yemen. All right, part 1, the foundation of Medina, and really, building a state. To really grasp how this administration worked, we have to recognize a fundamental premise. The actions of the Prophet in Medina weren't just about establishing a place of worship. They were explicitly about laying the infrastructure for a society to govern itself. Take a look at this verse from Surah Al-Hashr. It says, "Whatever the messenger gives you, take it, and whatever he forbids you from, leave it." Notice the general nature of the word whatever here. In the Arabic text, this is a broad, sweeping term. It doesn't restrict the Prophet's guidance to just things like prayer or fasting. It inherently applies to statehood, societal organization, and law. It establishes the divine backing for a comprehensive system of Islamic politics. Which brings us to this absolutely crucial concept, siyasa sharia, or Islamic politics. The source material notes this is often a neglected sunnah today, but what we're looking at is a brilliant piece of organizational design, one that still requires careful study. And just a quick note, to honor the historical context and focus entirely on the brilliant mechanics of this governance, we won't be using any artistic depictions of people in our visuals today. Instead, we are looking directly at the structural blueprints that guided them through the maze of political life. Moving on to Section 2. Medina's Constitution, the Sahifat al-Medina. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it tackles a massive problem. How you take a totally diverse group of tribes and unify them under one banner while still respecting their local customs. Well, you write a charter. That charter is the Sahifat al-Medina. And what's groundbreaking here is how this document acted very much like a modern-day constitution. It didn't try to erase the tribal identities. Instead, it treated the tribes like important political units, almost equivalent to many states or provinces within a larger framework. It defined their exact relationships and responsibilities. Just to put the sheer scale of this organizational challenge into perspective, look at this number, 40. The Sahifat explicitly named 40 different sub-tribes or clans. Imagine trying to coordinate 40 distinct groups, each with their own leaders, histories, and customs, into a single cohesive state. It's like a giant puzzle. It required a massive, massive delegation of authority. And this setup brilliantly illustrates what we call devolution today. On a central level, the Prophet retained command over the overarching jurisdictions, common security against outside attacks, taxation, and military expeditions. But locally, the clans handled their own internal affairs. They resolved their own blood money disputes, managed the release of their own prisoners of war, and looked after their own poor and needy. The clans had genuine local autonomy. We can see exactly how this worked on the ground in the specific clause from the Sahifa. This one is regarding the Banu Sa'ida clan, which was headed by Sa'd ibn Ubadah. It explicitly states they shall be responsible for their own ward and pay their blood money in mutual collaboration. This legally empowered the clan to operate as a self-sufficient mini-province, directly responsible for the justice and welfare of its own people. Okay, Section 3, the 12 elected naqibs, or local tribal leaders. Now, you can't have devolved powers without local leaders to actually manage them, right? Let's see how this was handled. The term used for these local representatives was naqib. A naqib was a chief entrusted with managing the community's interests, learning their news, and investigating issues. But here's the real kicker. These chiefs weren't simply appointed top-down by the central government. No, they were elected by the tribes themselves on the explicit orders of the Prophet. Look closely at this command from the Prophet. He said, "Bring out to me from among you 12 chiefs, so that they may be in charge of their people and whatever is in them." Notice that word whatever again. Just as it appeared in the Quranic verse we looked at earlier, here it gives these naqibs full general powers over their specific districts. This serves as powerful historical evidence for the practice of having elected local governors within the early Islamic State. Let's move to the next slide and see how this builds into a highly specific administrative structure among the Ansar tribes. We have 12 naqibs in total, 9 elected from the Khazraj tribe and 3 from the Aus. But I want to be clear, these weren't just career politicians. These were individuals with profound service to the state. We're talking commanders at Badr, martyrs at Uhud. They carried immense local legitimacy with their people. Which brings us to Section 4, Autonomy of Jewish Tribes and Minority Self-Governance. So we've seen how the Muslim tribes were organized, but Medina wasn't entirely Muslim. The Sahifat actually granted what the source material describes as semi-independent statehood for the Jewish tribes of Medina. Just like the Muslim clans, they were entirely responsible for all their internal affairs. They managed their own disputes, handled their own blood money, and cared for their own poor. They deferred to the Prophet only for internation disputes. This demonstrates an incredibly high level of jurisdictional autonomy for non-Muslim citizens, known as dhimmi, living within the Islamic State. And the historical record backs this up structurally. The Prophet didn't appoint separate emirs over them. He didn't establish state mosques within their communities, and there was absolutely no forced relocation. There was zero agenda to dilute their culture or pressure these communities to assimilate religiously. Their internal independence was completely respected. So the crucial point is, what was their primary obligation to the broader state? It's right here in the Sahifat. And the Jews spend with the believers as long as they are at war. Basically, their one major overarching obligation was to the common defense and security of Medina. As long as they contributed to protecting the city from outside threats, their internal self-governance was guaranteed. Finally, Section 5, expanding to Yemen, a scalable model. You know, a system that works for a city is impressive, for sure. But a system that can scale, that is a true masterclass in governance. Chronologically, state formation in Medina was followed a few years later by the pivotal Treaty of Hudaybiyah in 628 CE. This treaty was a major catalyst. It triggered a dramatic shift from a compact city-state model to a much wider empire model, leading to the rapid expansion of the Islamic State into vast regions of Arabia, eventually reaching all the way down to Yemen. Naturally, this level of expansion required some new structural terminology. Vast new regions like Yemen were categorized as a wilaya, a major province of the state. In fact, Yemen became the very first major province of the Islamic State. But how do you govern a territory that far from Medina? Do you just scrap the whole devolved blueprint? Not at all. Actually, they brought the narrative full circle. A top-level emir, known as a wali, managed the province centrally, while the tribal chiefs continued to operate locally via election or consent. In Yemen, the Prophet actually kept the former Persian governor, Bathan ibn Sasan, and appointed him as the wali. Yet beneath him, the core principle of non-interference remained totally intact. The state did not dictate local tribal leadership. The locals did. Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought. How can understanding Medina's devolved administrative blueprint change how we view historical governance today? When we peel back the layers and look strictly at the data, the charts, and the constitutional clauses, it completely challenges us to rethink early Islamic civilization. It wasn't just a religious movement, it was an absolute masterclass in decentralized statecraft, perfectly balancing central authority with robust local autonomy. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this structural breakdown inspires you to dive even deeper into the fascinating history of governance.